You don't bring up something negative unless you're willing to help them change. So it doesn't help a kid for us to say, oh, you're such a vapor, you should quit. Or why would you vape? Why do you think that's a good idea? Haven't you read that it can ruin your lungs? Those are true statements, but we don't bring that up with, the kids who we care about and work with until we're able to help them change, which means we invest. Now we will gain relationship equity and trust because we've been teaching them how to overcome something, not just yelling at them for doing something that's so dangerous.
In many ways, it's hard to say this, but in reality, most of our kids are going to battle with addiction of some sort in their lifetime. Some of that is because so much of the world is designed to get them addicted. So many people are really working to chemically engineer our lives so that we become addicted to things. Things like food and technology are just a couple of the many things that are right now being designed to have us be addicted beings. So what do we do in these moments? It can be a really dark place for parents. But today on the Celebrate Kids podcast, in this daily segment, Facing the Dark, Dr. Kathy has some great insights for us to help us think well in this cultural moment so we don't lose heart. Let's turn now to Dr. Kathy Cook.
Don't be afraid of the dark. Be careful with stars. Not every light is gonna guide you, baby. Not every light is gonna guide you.
So, Dr. Kathy, e-cigarette use among young people in the U.S. has dropped significantly over the last year. This is according to a new government study. The hopeful signs come as more schools are installing high-tech vape detectors in bathrooms and locker rooms to curb student use of e-cigarettes. Some districts are using money from a $1.7 billion legal settlement against e-cigarette manufacturer Juul Labs to pay for these devices. But there's disagreement over whether the monitors are the best way to address the problem, and they've raised some privacy concerns. E-cigarette use is declining, even as the industry eyes teens for new products. Nearly 1.6 million, or about 6%, of high school and middle school students reported using e-cigarettes in 2024. That's compared to 7.7%, or 2.3 million the previous year, according to a 2024 annual National Youth Tobacco Survey. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration says the long-term effects of vaping are not really understood, but that for many teens, nicotine-related changes in the brain may affect attention, learning, and memory. Now, Dr. Kathy, we've seen and read different reports of the dynamic impact that vaping does, specifically to lung development for young people. But I want to ask, when we look at the impacts of substances on mental health, there seems to be a pretty clear link on some of this. But what about the link of substances to actually a person's identity? What does substance use say about someone and who they are? Does it say anything about a person's identity when they're using different substances like this?
Oh, that's such a great question. So identity is defined kind of by the question, who am I? And it's critically important. We have taught here for years that identity controls behavior. Who I think I am is who I will be. And so these kids would likely answer the question, who are you? Well, I'm a vape user, and maybe I'm a sneak. And I imagine some of these kids think, and I'm assuming this, Wayne, that I'm lost, or I don't have a lot to contribute, or I don't know how to handle my anxiety, and I want to be a part of the cool kid club, so I'm going to become a vapor. My guess is that that's some of the thinking that's going on here. And if they go down that slippery slope of I have to do something like this that is actually unhealthy for me, and I know that, if I have to do that still in order to be cool or to be wanted or to be seen, then that starts you out on a terrible trajectory of bad decision-making where you don't value yourself, but you're going to value community with how would I say it? You're going to value community with the less than ideal kids rather than valuing your own well-being. That's a slippery slope to go on for sure. And you're setting yourself up for the adult leadership to form an opinion of you. So I think the peer group forms an opinion, and some are going to reject you because you're one of those kids, and some are going to welcome you in. And I realize that that's the rub. But I also think that educators, caregivers, parents, administrators, when we find out, oh, he's a vapor or she's a vapor, we form an opinion that they're lost or confused or in denial and frankly breaking rules. And that's not good either. And our opinion of teenagers matters in the way that we treat them and the things that they believe about themselves.
Yeah, Dr. Kathy, I love that. I think that's really important for us as parents to think through, and even those that are working with kids. If we're caring for those who might be, I don't know, dabbling or even using different substances, how can we address what we're seeing in their lives without really, I would say, maybe losing the relationship or maybe even destroying kind of their sense of who they are, because they're really building an identity in something that's different. When we address something like that, it can feel like an attack on the person, like we don't really fully understand them or what they're doing or why they're doing it. And is there a good way that we can maybe approach some of that? What are your thoughts there?
Insightful questions. I think we bring it up carefully. We earn the right to be heard. So maybe we are not the one to bring it up if we don't have a stellar relationship with a student in a school or at a church, but somebody else has a better relationship. Maybe that person is the one and goes and talks to that particular kid. But I think it's love. The love I have for you and the hope that I have for your future requires that I speak to you about the decisions you've made. And the kid can roll their eyes and say, that's not what you're doing it. But we have to know in our knowing as the adults that we're doing this because we love you. We're concerned for you and we believe in your future. And it can be positive if you choose to stay away from negative people and influences, including something like vaping, which does ruin your lungs. We have evidence of that, and a permanent scarring. And then, of course, can contribute to other decision making as well, where they might start with vaping and they move to something that is actually a more dangerous thing to become addicted to. So I don't think yes, could we lose a relationship? Yes. But if we do it right and we instruct, so here's the thing, Wayne. This is what we teach at the ministry. You don't bring up something negative unless you're willing to help them change. So it doesn't help a kid for us to say, oh, you're such a vapor, you should quit. Or why would you vape? Why do you think that's a good idea? Haven't you read that it can ruin your lungs? Those are true statements, but we don't bring that up with, the kids who we care about and work with until we're able to help them change, which means we invest and we walk with them and we offer them medical assistance. We offer them support. We offer them an alternative way to handle their stress. We offer the skills they need to relate well to healthy kids, et cetera. Now we will gain relationship equity and trust because we've been teaching them how to overcome something, not just yelling at them for doing something that's so dangerous.
Oh, I love that, Dr. Kathy. I think that those are really helpful things to restore, or maybe even retain relationship with our kids as we're working through a lot of those things. I remember there was a story of a friend of mine who was really ministering to a college professor who didn't believe really in the God of the Bible or even that God created the world. He didn't believe the world was created. And so my friend, throughout the course of the year, really worked to open his eyes to the dynamic beauty and reality of the fact that there is a need for God in the world and that God's made himself known inside of creation. And at the end of the semester, my friend said that his professor really had, given up on his, I would call them maybe secular convictions, and turned instead into this place of there needs to be a primary cause that's intelligent, that's caused the universe. But what's interesting about the story is the professor didn't want to have anything to do with my friend. And he told my friend, basically, you've kind of destroyed my whole worldview. His entire life and much of his academic career was built around this presupposition that there is no God in the world. And now he had to reform how he was going to now be a professor in that setting. And it really challenged my friend. And my friend said that he had to go and find really other people to start ministering to this professor because my friend now wasn't being trusted. And I wonder if that can be a little bit of a backdrop for us as parents, where a lot of times as parents, we might address something with our kids and we know it needs to be addressed maybe with a little bit more force to just get our kids to be in that place where they stop doing the thing, right? It could be anything from, mistreatment of their cell phone to, music they're listening to or friends that they're hanging out with. And I think that there needs to be other people that we bring around in some of those situations, other, Christian mentors or pastors or people at the schools that our kids are involved in, or even maybe friends. I want to ask you this. How do we bring others around? And maybe even what characteristics should we look for in other believers or other people that we bring around our kids so that there can be really a chorus of voices about the truth in the world? Because our kids are going to have what I would call earth-shattering moments in their life. And some of them might come at the hands of us as parents or those working with kids. So what kind of characteristics and what kind of people should we really bring around our kids when they have maybe some distress in the relationship that we have with them?
This is such a good topic because we need to make sure we remember, as adults who care for preteens and teens, that they will choose to surround themselves with other people. It's often common that they'll start listening to the parents of their best friends, or to a professor or a high school teacher or somebody in a church who they connect with. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they are disregarding their parents' input. They just want to find out, do other people believe what my dad and mom believe? So it's not a bad thing when your kids begin to listen to other voices. If we can help to control who those other voices are, we would be wise, because they will sometimes go for people who they know are going to disrespect a parent's perspective. And now they can say, well, Mr. Jones says this. And we don't necessarily want them to have that space and that place where they would be influenced negatively. So yeah, I think, who's trustworthy, who believes what we believe, and do they have something in common with our kids? Could we invite them over for dinner? Like this old-fashioned idea that we invite people over and we demonstrate the gift of hospitality. Or you meet up at a park for pizza after church and you invite another family, and you know that that dad is really different from you, and that your youngest son might really engage with him well because they have a similar interest in airplanes or basketball, or, I don't know, Fruit Loops or whatever, and they can have some really fun conversations. And I think that would be really cool. Overcomers would be great. We have got to introduce our kids to overcomers. It is not terrible to end up, in a messy situation. It's going to happen. But what we want is to understand you don't have to stay there. You don't have to stay there. The person who, uses the cell phone badly, or who uses vape, or who disrespects the younger sister, you don't have to stay that person. So do we know somebody who's overcome the very dilemma that our kids are struggling with? And would they listen to that person? Another example, Wayne, would be somebody who has not yet overcome the dilemma and wishes he would have started 10 years ago. And it reminds me of those commercials on TV that I don't like watching, where the person has had a really bad cancer diagnosis and is very, very ill, and says into the camera, stop smoking. If you don't stop smoking, look what'll happen to you. That kind of thing can maybe really motivate some people. So I love it. Let's pay attention. Let's be more intentional about knowing what our kids are struggling with, knowing what they delight in, and who do we know who could be connected.
As Dr. Kathy was talking today, it reminded me of a passage. It comes out of Luke chapter 15, and I'll begin reading at verse 17. But when he came to himself, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have more than enough bread? Yet I perish with hunger. I will arise and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants." So he rose and came to his father. But when he was still a long way off, his father saw him, felt compassion, and ran and embraced him and kissed him. And the son said to him, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son." But the father said to his servants, "Bring quickly the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet, and bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let us celebrate and eat. For this is my son, who is dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." And they began to celebrate. This is the parable of the prodigal son. The younger son in the parable demands his inheritance and leaves home, indulges in reckless and sinful living, and really wastes the wealth that his father has given him on excessive pleasures. The son becomes enslaved by the pursuit of indulgence and pleasure, and really becomes addicted to it. It leads him to ruin and despair, and he ends up in an incredibly low place, feeding pigs and longing for their food. And in his desperation, he realizes his mistake and repents and returns to his father, who welcomes him back with open arms. This story really illustrates how, even after falling into destructive habits, repentance and turning back to God leads to redemption and restoration. I don't know if there's been a time in your life where you can say that you've encountered some sort of addiction or sin. I know in my life, the best day of my life was the day that I turned away from something that had enslaved me. The day that I went and trusted the Lord and confessed my sin to my friends and my family, and stood as somebody that really had to face the music, but also stood in God's righteousness before everyone, including God. I think teaching our kids how to face challenging times and trusting the Lord in those challenging times, really throwing ourselves to the feet of God to say, I can't bear this anymore. I just trust in you, Lord. Telling our kids stories of people who've done that and giving that as an example can give them security and confidence in really the world and the way the world's organized and who they are, to help them know that they're not their addictions. They don't have an identity or even a purpose inside of them. Their identity and purpose is really as people inside of Christ. And facing the music, going and doing hard things, confessing sin, that's a testament to the reality of God in the world. And I think giving our kids that as a storyline can really give them really a bright light that'll shine and cut through dark moments. I want to thank you for listening to the Celebrate Kids podcast, this daily segment Facing the Dark. On behalf of Dr. Kathy Cook, my name is Wayne Stender. We're so glad you're joining us, and we're looking forward to seeing you here again tomorrow.